introduced to the Urantia Book in 1965 from the mother of a friend at Troy High, where Mike Pilato and I both had gone to, and that was Morgan Keith. I don't know if you knew him, Michael.
I don't think I did.
Class of '68. We were class of '69.
Right.
Yeah, he asked me by to take a look at his brand new Honda motorcycle, and while I was there, his mom, who was a bit eccentric, came on out and said, "Oh, I can see by your aura, you need to hear about this book." And so she grabbed me, took me inside the house, and that's where I saw it for the first time. And she let me borrow it, and I had it for probably I'd say 6 or so weeks, and I skimmed through it extensively, and I thought it was a lot of fun, but it didn't really take. I could tell that it had to do with time and space, extraterrestrials, and that it was far out. But I was 14 at the time, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't see or hear from it again until my dad's birthday in 1969. And my mom gave him a copy for his birthday present. And he opened it up, and I said, "Oh, wow, that's a great book. That's all about, UFOs and space people and, really cool stuff. I think you're going to love it, Dad." And my mom had a look of shock on her face. She had no idea. And she had gotten it from Jerry Bowden, who ran the bookstore on Raymond and Chapman, over by where the Alpha Beta used to be. And he had that triangle-shaped building, eclectic kind of fun books. And my dad had bought a lot of books there. And when my mom had gone in and said, "What's a good book for my dad or for her husband?" He had said, "Oh, well, a lot of science fiction readers or writers are go reading this thing called the Urantia Book. And even if your dad doesn't want to read it, he should know about it because he's the science fiction guru." And so just at that, that's how my mom bought the book. And then she had no idea, that it was as cosmic as it is. And it proceeded to sit on my dad's shelf. I don't think he ever picked it up. And then I was introduced to the book again a year after that, in 1970. And that was when another friend, Michael Pratt, came on by and said, "I'm taking off for a trip to Europe, and I don't know if and when I'm going to be back, but I'm giving away all of my stuff. I think you'd be interested in reading it." And that was the book that I actually started to read. And that was probably November 1970. And I had just gotten back from 10 weeks traveling through Europe, and I hadn't gone back to Cal State Fullerton yet. I was kind of just hanging out and living on Glenwood Street, what turned out to be kind of a hotbed of Urantia Book readers. And so I was reading this thing, and I was reading it voraciously, and up in the tree house and in my room and on the couch, and And the next thing I knew, the Glenwood Bros, as we kind of called ourselves, we were having our own little study group, and I was reading to them. And then a few of them went out and bought their own books. And of course, they all went to Jerry Bowden over at the bookstore. And one of the friends gave my book away to a prospective girlfriend that he didn't even know, that he was trying to impress her. And then I came home, where's my Urantia book? Oh, I gave it to, what was her name? And it was gone. My book was gone. And I went back to the bookstore to buy another one. And he had said, well, no one can get books. Urantia Foundation has stopped shipping them. And I just can't even buy anything. And he was buying them in the 10 books at a time lot. And he was quite a promoter. And so I was stuck, and there were none in the libraries. And then I remembered that my dad's book was still on the shelf back at the house. And so I went over to the house. Well, my dad was in Ireland at that time at Trinity College on sabbatical, studying, James Joyce, which was his true love. So he was on a 1 year, kind of tour, or one person show. And my mom was very suspect of the book, and she would not let me borrow his book. I just would not. She didn't even want me to come to the house and read it. And so I got the cash, and I called my dad, which back then, that was like $1 a minute to call. And said, you remember that, Urantia book, that you got for your birthday last year? Well, I had picked up a copy, but then someone gave my book away. Can I read yours? And when you come back, I'll make sure that you get a brand new one. And he said, fine, that's great. No problem. And so my mom reluctantly then let me take my dad's book home. And so sure enough, about, 2 or 3 months after that, Urantia Foundation started publishing again. They had a delay because they switched from the format of the 1967 printing, which is what I had, to the 1971, I think it was. And the cover changed, the logo changed. There were a bunch of edits. They were no longer lead printed. And so when Jerry's books showed up, of which, of course, he bought like 30 of them because there was a backlog. All of them were the new version except one. And so one of them had the old blue cover and was still a 67. And that's the one that I bought that I gave back to my dad. And that became his book. And then I had my 67, which was his. And then, and so that's how he was introduced to it. But it was my mother who started to read it after I brought it back to the house. And she read it like it was bad comics, like it was pornography, or like it was, something incredibly taboo, and she was an ardent Catholic, a mystic. She, was an artist and deeply spiritual. And she was just obsessed with her Catholicism. I mean, it was it was actually creepy. And so that's why she thought it was, wrong or evil, but she read it anyway. And that book ended up as her book. And when my dad came back from his year-long sabbatical, she bought him another book, which became my dad's book. And that's when my dad gave a copy. Actually, I gave a copy to his dad, Grandpa Willis, which my dad, Willis. And Grandpa Will was one of the most fanatical science fiction readers of all time. And so my dad grew up with all these science fiction books. And my Grandpa Will had over 5,000 science fiction books. And I had been able to talk to him the previous Christmas about this book that I was reading. And then when the books came in, then I bought him one and gave it to him. And so Grandpa Will became an avid reader, and which bothered my mom because she did not like her in-laws, and that's a whole nother story. But Grandpa Will took to it like a fish to water, and he started talking about science fiction themes that he saw in the book. And then he was rattling off the names of a lot of science fiction writers who liked that universal government, galactic government, organized universe stuff. And then he said, now, if I understand this, each of us has an inborn advisor, and that if we do what the inborn advisor tells us to do, that we're going to go to Havana. And I said, that's pretty much it, Grandpa, And so I've always liked that phrase, the inborn advisor. And then my, dad, started to read his own book, but by that time, my mom was won over, and she started reading to him, which was kind of one of the things that they did when they took trips out to the desert or went on camping trips or touring. And so she would read to him as they drove. And so he got a lot of his book orally from my mom. And then after he sat down and read it through, by that time I had long read it through. I was probably on my second or third time through. And then he and I, sat on down and we went through, parts of the book that he found just fascinating. And like I told Michael and you once before, what really intrigued him was the sentence structure. And as you know, my dad was a PhD English professor, Cal State Fullerton, widely recognized for his scholarship. He was Teacher of the Year, I think 1982, and State Teacher of the Year, the same year for the whole California university system. And my dad took his dad's science fiction books and his own science fiction books, and that became the wing of the Cal State Fullerton Sci-Fi Library. And then my dad brought in manuscripts from a wide variety of sci-fi writers, original edits and notes, and those are back in the days where you didn't have computers. And so if you go to that wing, you see, Ray Bradbury's stuff, and Frank Herbert's and Philip K. Dick, and probably about 10 different science fiction writers donated their notes. And my dad was not a writer, but he wrote the introductions to hundreds of sci-fi books. And he was the regular MC at the Nebula and other awards for the science fiction hub writers. And he would travel around the world wherever they met. And at our, home, as I was growing up, we had science fiction writers coming in and staying with us on a pretty regular basis. And so I got to know, quite a few of these guys. I personally talked to James Blish and to Frank Herbert, who owned a book. He owned one on his own, and he just thought it was jolly. And he thought it was the best attempt at making a case for Christianity that he had ever seen. And that he thought it was just a fabulous hoax. But he loved it, and he loved that I loved it, and he loved my enthusiasm and just asked questions, quite extensively. Because even though he had a book, he hadn't really read it. I could, kind of pin him down, but he loved to talk about it. And the same with Ray Bradbury too. Now, Ray did not own a book, to my understanding, but he read through my dad's when he came on by, and he talked to me about it. That was right when he was putting on the play Dandelion Wine that he had written, and it was first shown at Cal State Fullerton. And and that's where, that's where my dad then wrote some sort of a paper, and I don't know who he shared it with, but it got circulated among science fiction circles. And then one day, my dad got a very terse note from Isaac Asimov saying, "Willis, you're a scholar. How in the world could you have fallen for this nonsense? Don't you know that it's, the responsibility of academics to be skeptical? I hear that you're a believer, and what has gotten into you? Get back to science, and I don't know what happened to that note. I read it, and after my dad died, I tried to find it. So did my brother Patrick, who became an avid reader too, as did my sister Jean. Now, my sister Meg and my brother Peter never really took to it, but my mom became one of the greatest scholars you'll ever meet. And she had probably 20 pages of notes and cross references in her library. But back to the sci-fi. I didn't know of that many sci-fi writers who really took to it. Now, my dad said that he believed that Arthur C. Clarke was a book reader, but that he did not know that. But he thought that Clarke was. But that was just my dad's supposition. But there was quite a bit of talk of Gene Roddenberry being a Urantia Book reader. And the secret that Roddenberry didn't want to get out, which was that his concept of the Federation was really lifted right from the Urantia Book, which is part of what my grandpa Will suspected, that idea of an organized, proactive universe with a definite plan, that's pretty far out stuff. And then I know that there've been other bits of people pretty sure that Roddenberry had taken to it. Other than that, I know that Philip K. Dick was quite familiar with it. Now, whether he was an active reader or had his own, book, I don't know, but he was probably one of my dad's better friends. And my dad just loved Dick's, work. And, my
What was his name again?
Dick was
Sorry?
Philip K. Dick, D-I-C-K.
Okay.
Yeah, he was, I think his big book, When Robots Dream, Do They Dream of Robotic Sheep? I think it was. And then the whole Mars Total Recall, I think that was his. And so there was kind of a cadre. And I had gone to some of the Nebula awards. And so I would then mingle. And then that's where I also knew that Harry Harrison, he had again become familiar with it. And so it kind of affirmed what Jerry Bowden, the book dealer, had said, that there were a bunch of science fiction writers who were using this as source material or references, and I can confirm that because I knew a bunch of these guys that were at least familiar with it,
I didn't remember, or maybe you had mentioned it before, but that's pretty fascinating that you knew Ray Bradbury and you guys actually talked about it.
Oh yeah. But I don't know if he had a book, but I know he browsed it when he was staying at my dad's, and he and I chatted about some of the concepts. He was interested in the history of the Earth, and I always found him to be a very down-to-earth guy, and he didn't like the term science fiction. I think he preferred speculative fiction, of which a bunch of science fiction writers like that term. But what my dad liked, being a scholar, was the impeccable language, the sentence structure. And he was quite upfront that he had never seen a book in his entire life that was so well written. And he would diagram sentences and said, I can't believe this is an entire paragraph of a sentence, but it's just perfect use of the semicolon and perfect use of where the commas are, and look at this word. This leads really well to this, and then he said this is written in perfect English, and so that convinced him of its authenticity, because he did not believe that any human being could write that well. And my dad, read a lot of the modern mystics, Madame Blavatsky and Gurdjieff and P.D. Ouspensky. I mean, my dad was an English scholar extraordinaire, and he read just all kinds of things that claimed to be automatic writing and words of the spirit, and he found it fascinating. But he said none of the language could ever compare with the Urantia Book. And what he was working on in his last years was trying to show the difference in the writing styles of the different authors, which I don't know if there's anyone else that has really gone that far into the epidemiology or the way the book is constructed. But that absolutely intrigued him, and he did his own scholarship. My dad did. He was looking through phone books of Chicago from that time, and he was researching some of the apocrypha of, who was involved with the forum. And he was trying to do the sleuthing to figure out, who the contact person was, who the subject was. And he had come to the conclusion that it was Wilford Kellogg, the son of the serial guy. But that was just my dad's own conclusion. But that was just more from anecdotals, and
what was your dad's name again?
Willis Everett McNelly Jr. And there's, of course, his dad's same name too, Senior.
Yeah, and so it became like a sci-fi family, multi-generational.
Yeah, and then that's actually my brother Patrick's name, is Willis Patrick. But then he only uses it in his pen name for some of the writing that he does. And he calls himself Will Patrick. But he's just known as Patrick.
Yeah, and I think when we talked before, you said that, so you knew, of the people who you kind of got to know, did you say you kind of got to know Arthur C. Clarke and Frank Herbert?
Just that my dad had thought, because my dad was one of the consultants on 2001, and he did a lot of screenings and went to the sets while it was going on. And so he suspected, but I had no contact with Clarke.
Okay,
but that was one of my dad's suspicions.
It was Ray Bradbury and Frank Herbert, who you kind
of
yeah,
and Frank had his own book, and Frank and I kept our relationship going on our own, and he gave me his home phone number and said that I could call him, collect, and he would then turn around and call me. And I did that probably 4 or 5 times, and I helped consult on the last 2 of the 5 books that he wrote, which began as the Dune trilogy, and ended up becoming 5 books, because as he told me, no one was buying his other books. He needed to make some cash.
Yeah, and I think you think that he might have gotten some ideas for Dune.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, he definitely did. And he actually thought that Paul Muad'Dib was the anti-Messiah. And that's how he wanted to present him, was the alternative to the Jesus character. And, kind of as a, neutral foil. He didn't want the Messiah to be the hero. He felt he lost control of the book Dune when Paul Muad'Dib took over. He wanted the book to be about Leet Keynes, the planetary ecologist, and he wanted it to be a book that affirmed the importance of scientific management of scarce water resources and how to make the desert bloom through storing water, irrigation, and having a water cult, and that would lead to turning the dunes into growing, thriving ecoculture, terraforming. But that kind of tripped up when Paul, the Messiah, took over. And I had a long talk with Robert Heinlein, who wrote Stranger in a Strange Land. And I talked to him about Frank Herbert's comments about what had happened with, Paul Muad'Dib. And Frank thought that a similar thing happened with him and Michael Valentine Smith. And that Heinlein wanted Jubal Horshaw, the wealthy entrepreneur who had his own island, his own planes, his own beautiful women around him. He wanted him to be the hero of the story and to save the day. But then Michael Valentine Smith took over. And Robert Heinlein did not like the fact that the hippie culture took to his book and took to his stuff. Because, you know, he was a militarist, he was pretty right wing and, you know, staunch Christian, you know, and, you know, and he had an integrity of his thinking that, you know, I found absolutely fascinating.